Nabokov on Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. (1915). Of course, no matter how keenly, how admirably, a story, a piece of music, a picture is discussed and analyzed, there will be minds that remain blank and spines that remain unkindled. To take upon us the mystery of things, what King Lear so wistfully says for himself and for Cordelia. This is also my suggestion for everyone who takes art seriously. A poor man is robbed of his overcoat, Gogol's the greatcoat, or more correctly, the carrack. Another poor fellow is turned into a beetle, Kafka's The Metamorphosis. So what? There is no rational answer to so what. We can take the story apart, we can find out how the bits fit, how one part of the pattern responds to the other, but you have to have in you some cell, some gene, some germ that will vibrate in answer to sensations that you can neither define nor dismiss. Beauty plus pity, that is the closest we can get to a definition of art. Where there is beauty, there is pity. For the simple reason that beauty must die. Beauty always dies. The manner dies with the matter. The world dies with the individual. If Kafka's The Metamorphosis strikes anyone as something more than an entomological fantasy, then I congratulate him on having joined the ranks of good and great readers. I want to discuss fantasy and reality and their mutual relationship. If we consider the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story as an allegory, the struggle between good and evil within every man, then this allegory is tasteless and childish. To the type of mind that would see an allegory here, its shadow play would also postulate physical happenings which common sense knows to be impossible, but actually, in the setting of the story as viewed by the commonsensical mind, nothing, at first sight, seems to run counter to general human experience. I want to suggest, however, that a second look shows that the setting of the story does run counter to general human experience, and that Utterson and the other men around Jekyll are, in a sense, as fantastic as Mr. Hyde. Unless we see them in a fantastic light, there is no enchantment, and if the enchanter leaves and the storyteller and the teacher remain alone together, they make poor company. The story of Jekyll and Hyde is beautifully constructed, but it is an old one. Its moral is preposterous, since neither good nor evil is actually depicted. On the whole, they are taken for granted, and the struggle goes on between two empty outlines. The enchantment lies in the art of Stevenson's fancy work. But I want to suggest that since art and thought, manner and matter are inseparable, there must be something of the same kind about the structure of the story, too. Let us be cautious, however. I still think that there is a flaw in the artistic realization of the story. If we consider form and content separately, a flaw which is missing in Gogol's The Carrack and in Kafka's The Metamorphosis. The fantastic side of the setting, Utterson, Enfield, Poole, Lanyon, and their London, is not of the same quality as the fantastic side of Jekyll's Hydeization. There is a crack in the picture, a lack of unity. The Carrack, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the Metamorphoses All three are commonly called fantasies. From my point of view, any outstanding work of art is a fantasy insofar as it reflects the unique world of a unique individual. But when people call these three stories fantasies, they merely imply that the stories depart in their subject matter from what is commonly called reality. Let us therefore examine what reality is, in order to discover in what manner and to what extent so-called fantasies depart from so-called reality. Let us take three types of men walking through the same landscape. Number one is a city man on a well-deserved vacation. Number two is a professional botanist. Number three is a local farmer. Number one, the city man, is what is called a realistic, commonsensical, matter-of-fact type. He sees trees as trees, and knows from his map that the road he is following is a nice new road leading to Newton, where there is a nice eating place recommended to him by a friend in his office. The botanist looks around and sees his environment in the very exact terms of plant life, precise biological and classified units such as specific trees and grasses, flowers and ferns, and for him this is reality. To him, the world of the stolid tourist, who cannot distinguish an oak from an elm, seems a fantastic, vague, dreamy, never-never world. Finally, the world of the local farmer differs from the two others in that his world is intensely emotional and personal, since he has been born and bred there, and knows every trail and individual tree, and every shadow from every tree across every trail, all in warm connection with his everyday work and his childhood, and 1,000 small things and patterns which the other two, the humdrum tourists and the botanical taxonomist, simply cannot know in the given place at the given time. Our farmer will not know the relation of the surrounding vegetation to the botanical conception of the world, and the botanist will know nothing of any importance to him about the barn, or that old field, or that old house under his cottonwoods, which are afloat, as it were, in a medium of personal memories, for one who was born there. So here we have three different worlds, three men, ordinary men, who have different realities. And of course, we could bring in a number of other beings: a blind man with a dog, a hunter with a dog with his man, a painter cruising in quest of a sunset, a girl out of gas. In every case, it would be a world completely different from the rest, since the most objective words, tree, road, flower, sky, barn, thumb, rain, have in each totally different subjective connotations. Indeed, this subjective life is so strong that it makes an empty and broken shell of the so-called objective existence. The only way back to objective reality is the following one. We can take these several individual worlds, mix them thoroughly together, scoop up a drop of that mixture, and call it objective reality. We may taste in it a particle of madness, if a lunatic passed through that locality, or a particle of complete and beautiful nonsense, if a man has been looking at a lovely field and imagining upon it a lovely factory producing buttons or bombs. But, on the whole, these mad particles would be diluted in the drop of objective reality that we hold up to the light in our test tube. Moreover, this objective reality will contain something that transcends optical illusions and laboratory test. It will have elements of poetry, of lofty emotion, of energy and endeavor, and even here the Button King may find his rightful place, of pity, pride, passion, and the craving for a thick steak at the recommended roadside eating place. So, when we say reality, we are really thinking of all this. In one drop, an average sample of a mixture of 1,000,000 individual realities. And it is in this sense of human reality that I use the term reality when placing it against a backdrop, such as the worlds of the Carrick, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the Metamorphosis, which are specific fantasies. In the Carrick and in the Metamorphoses, there is a central figure endowed with a certain amount of human pathos among grotesque, heartless characters, figures of fun or figures of horror, asses parading as zebras, or hybrids between rabbits and rats. In the Carrick, the human quality of the central figure is of a different type from Gregor in Kafka's story, but this human pathetic quality is present in both. In Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, there is no such human pathos, no throb in the throat of the story, and none of that intonation of "I cannot get out, I cannot get out," said the starling, so heartrending in Sterne's fantasy, A Sentimental Journey. True, Stevenson devotes many pages to the horror of Jekyll's plight, but the thing, after all, is only a superb Punch and Judy show. The beauty of Kafka's, the Gogol's private nightmares is that their essential human characters belong to the same private fantastic world as the inhuman characters around them, but the central one tries to get out of that world, to cast off the mask, to transcend the cloak or the carapace. But in Stevenson's story, there is none of that unity and none of that contrast. The Uttersons, the Pooles, the Enfields are meant to be commonplace, everyday characters. Actually, they are characters derived from Dickens, and thus they constitute phantasms that do not quite belong to Stevenson's own artistic reality, just as Stevenson's fog comes from a Dickensinian studio to envelop a conventional London. That would be Dickensian. I suggest, in fact, that Jekyll's magic drug is more real than Utterson's life. The fantastic Jekyll and Hyde theme, on the other hand, is supposed to be in contrast to the conventional London, but it is really the difference between a Gothic medieval theme and a Dickensian one. It is not the same kind of difference as that between an absurd world and pathetically absurd Bashmakin, or between an absurd world and tragically absurd Gregor. The Jekyll and Hyde theme does not quite form a unity with its setting, because its fantasy is of a different type from the fantasy of the setting. There is really nothing especially pathetic or tragic about Jekyll. We enjoy every detail of the marvelous juggling, of the beautiful trick, but there is no artistic emotional throb involved, and whether it is Jekyll or Hyde who gets the upper hand remains of supreme indifference to the good reader. I am speaking of rather nice distinctions, and it is difficult to put them in simple form. When a certain clear-thinking, but somewhat superficial French philosopher asked the profound but obscure German philosopher Hegel to state his views in a concise form, Hegel answered him harshly, "These things can be discussed neither concisely nor in French. We shall ignore the question whether Hegel was right or not, and still try to put into a nutshell the difference between the Gogol Kafka, we shall ignore the question whether Hegel was right or not, and still try to put into a nutshell the difference between the Gogol-Kafka kind of story and Stevenson's kind. In Gogol, the Kafka, oh my, in Gogol and Kafka, the absurd central character belongs to the absurd world around him, but pathetically and tragically attempts to struggle out of it into the world of humans, and dies in despair. In Stevenson, the unreal character central belongs to a brand of unreality different from that of the world around him. He is a Gothic character in a Dickensian setting, and when he struggles and then dies, his fate possesses only conventional pathos. I do not at all mean that Stevenson's story is a failure. No, it is a minor masterpiece in its own conventional terms. But it has only 2 dimensions, whereas the Gogol-Kafka stories have 5 or 6. Born in 1883, Franz Kafka came from a German-speaking Jewish family in Prague, Czechoslovakia. He is the greatest German writer of our time. Such poets as Rilke or such novelists as Thomas Mann are dwarfs or plaster saints in comparison to him. He read for law at the German University in Prague, and from 1908 on he worked as a petty clerk, a small employee in a very Gogolian office for an insurance company. Hardly any of his now famous works, such as his novels The Trial, 1925, and The Castle, 1926, were published in his lifetime. His greatest short story, The Metamorphosis, in German Die Verwandlung, was written in the fall of 1912 and published in Leipzig in October 1915. In 1917, he coughed blood, and the rest of his life, a period of 7 years, was punctuated by sojourns in Central European sanatoriums. In those last years of his short life, he died at the age of 41. He had a happy love affair and lived with his mistress in Berlin in 1923, not far from me. In the spring of 1924, he went to the sanatorium near Vienna, where he died on the 3rd of June of tuberculosis of the larynx. He was buried in the Jewish cemetery in Prague. He asked his friend Max Brod to burn everything he had written, even published material. Fortunately, Brod did not comply with his friend's wish. Before starting to talk of the Metamorphosis, I want to dismiss 2 points of view. I want to dismiss completely Max Brod's opinion that the category of sainthood, not that of literature, is the only one that can be applied to the understanding of Kafka's writings. Kafka was first of all an artist, and although it may be maintained that every artist is a manner of a saint, I feel that very clearly myself, I do not think that any religious implications can be read into Kafka's genius. The other matter that I want to dismiss is the Freudian point of view. His Freudian biographers, like Nader, in The Frozen Sea, 1948, contend, for example, that the Metamorphosis has a basis in Kafka's complex relationship with his father and his lifelong sense of guilt. They contend further that in mythical symbolism, children are represented by vermin, which I doubt, and then go on to say that Kafka uses the symbol of the bug to represent the sun according to these Freudian postulates. The bug, they say, aptly characterizes his sense of worthlessness before his father. I am interested here in bugs, not in humbugs, and I reject this nonsense. Kafka himself was extremely critical of Freudian ideas. He considered psychoanalysis, I quote, a helpless error, and he regarded Freud's theories as very approximate, very rough pictures, which did not do justice to details, or, what is more, to the essence of the matter. This is another reason why I should like to dismiss the Freudian approach and concentrate instead upon the artistic moment. The greatest literary influence upon Kafka was Flaubert's. Flaubert, who loathed pretty prose, would have applauded Kafka's attitude towards his tool. Kafka liked to draw his terms from the language of law and science, giving them a kind of ironic precision, with no intrusion of the author's private sentiments. This was exactly Flaubert's method, through which he achieved a singular poetic effect. The hero of the Metamorphosis is Gregor Samsa, pronounced Zamza, who is the son of middle-class parents in Prague, Flaubertian Philistines, people interested only in the material side of life, and vulgarians in their tastes. Some 5 years before, old Samsa lost most of his money, whereupon his son Gregor took a job with one of his father's creditors and became a traveling salesman in cloth. His father then stopped working altogether. His sister, Greta, was too young to work. His mother was ill with asthma. Thus young Gregor not only supported the whole family, but also found for them the apartment they are now living in. This apartment, a flat in an apartment house in Charlotte Street, to be exact, is divided into segments, as he will be divided himself. We are in Prague, Central Europe, in the year 1912. Servants are cheap, so that the Samsas can afford a servant maid, Anna, aged 16, 1 year younger than Greta, and a cook. Gregor is mostly away traveling, but when the story starts, he is spending a night at home between 2 business trips, and it is then that the dreadful thing happened. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from a troubled dream, he found himself transformed in his bed into a monstrous insect. He was lying on his hard, as it were, armor-plated back, and when he lifted his head a little, he could see his dome-like brown belly, divided into corrugated segments, on top of which the bed quilt could hardly keep in position and was about to slide off completely. His numerous legs, which were pitifully thin compared to the rest of his bulk, flimmered, flicker plus shimmer, helplessly before his eyes. What has happened to me? He thought. It was no dream. Gregor's eyes turned next to the window. One could hear raindrops beating on the tin of the windowsill's outer ledge, and the dull weather made him quite melancholy. What about sleeping a little longer and forgetting all this nonsense? He thought, but it could not be done, for he was accustomed to sleep on his right side, and in his present condition he could not turn himself over. However violently he tried to hurl himself on his right side, he always swung back to the supine position. He tried it at least 100 times, shutting his eyes to keep from seeing his wriggly legs, and only desisted when he began to feel in his side a faint dull ache he had never experienced before. Footnote on shutting his eyes. Vienne's note in his Annotated copy. A regular beetle has no eyelids and cannot close its eyes. A beetle with human eyes. About the passage in general, he has the note. In the original German, there is a wonderful flowing rhythm here in this dreamy sequence of sentences. He is half awake. He realizes his plight without surprise, with a childish acceptance of it, and at the same time he still clings to human memories, human experience. The metamorphosis is not quite complete as yet. Ed. End of footnote. Ach Gott, he thought. What an exhausting job I've picked on. Traveling about day in, day out, many more anxieties on the road than in the office. The plague of worrying about train connections, the bad and irregular meals, casual acquaintances, never to be seen again, never to become intimate friends. The hell with it all. He felt a slight itching on the skin of his belly, slowly pushed himself on his back, nearer the top of the bed, so that he could lift his head more easily, identified the itching place which was covered with small white dots, the nature of which he could not understand, and tried to touch it with a leg, but drew the leg back immediately, for the contact made a cold shiver run through him. Now what exactly is the vermin into which poor Gregor, the seedy commercial traveler, is so suddenly transformed? It obviously belongs to the branch of jointed leggers, arthropoda, to which insects and spiders and centipedes and crustaceans belong. If the numerous little legs mentioned in the beginning mean more than 6 legs, then Gregor would not be an insect from the zoological point of view. But I suggest that a man awakening on his back and finding he has many as 6 legs vibrating in the air might feel that 6 was sufficient to be called numerous. We shall, therefore, assume that Gregor has 6 legs, that he is an insect. Next question. What insect? Commentators say cockroach, which of course does not make sense. A cockroach is an insect that is flat in shape with large legs, and Gregor is anything but flat. He is convex on both sides, belly and back, and his legs are small. He approaches a cockroach in only one respect. His coloration is brown. That is all. Apart from this, he has a tremendous convex belly divided into segments, and a hard rounded back suggestive of winged cases. In beetles, these cases conceal flimsy little wings that can be expanded and then may carry the beetle for miles and miles in a blundering flight. Curiously enough, Gregor, the beetle, never found out that he had wings under the hard covering of his back. This is a very nice observation on my part to be treasured all your lives. Some Gregors, some Joes and Janes do not know that they have wings. Further, he has strong mandibles. He uses these organs to turn the key in the lock while standing erect on his hind legs. On his third pair of legs, a strong little pair, and this gives us the length of his body, which is about 3 feet long. In the course of the story, he gets gradually accustomed to using his new appendages, his feet, his feelers. This brown, convex, dog-sized beetle is very broad. I should imagine him to look like this. And he draws a picture here of a more rounded beetle-like shape rather than a elongated cockroach type shape, you know, rounded, swelled, bulbous kind of thing. Yeah, it's a rough sketch. In the original German text, the old charwoman calls him Mistkäfer, a dung beetle. It is obvious that the good woman is adding the epithet only to be friendly. He is not technically a dung beetle. He is merely a big beetle. I must add that neither Gregor nor Kafka saw that beetle any too clearly. Let us look closer at the transformation. The change, though shocking and striking, is not so odd as might be assumed at first glance. A commonsensical commentator, Paul L. Landsberg, in the Kafka Problem, 1946 edition, Angel Flores, notes that when we go to bed in unfamiliar surroundings, we are apt to have a moment of bewilderment upon awakening, a sudden sense of unreality, and this experience must occur over and over again in the life of a commercial traveler, a manner of living that renders impossible any sense of continuity. The sense of reality depends upon continuity, upon duration. After all, awakening as an insect is not much different from awakening as Napoleon or George Washington. I knew a man who awoke as the Emperor of Brazil. On the other hand, the isolation and the strangeness of so-called reality, this is after all something which constantly characterized the artist, the genius, the discoverer. The Samsa family around the fantastic insect is nothing less than mediocrity surrounding genius. And that, you could say, is the introduction to his approaching Kafka's Metamorphosis. And then, following that, he breaks the observations into parts, right? The actual parts. 1 through 3, that would be, 3 parts, and goes through the scenes to take a look from there on in. And the next segment will do exactly that, break them into parts. Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. And for those who were in fact curious, here are the rough sketches of the beetle that Nabokov made. You can see there. The legs aren't as clear. The lines are rather thin, the lighting. But you get the general idea. Kind of a bulbous, round-looking beetle shape. And some others written directly on the page of the copy he was working from. Also included here, Nabokov made a little diagram of the actual layout of the apartment or the flat in which the story takes place. See that there? I don't know how clearly. Right? Little sketches here and there. Yes, so next time we'll follow up with part 1.